My name is Margaret Holloway, and today I will tell you the moment my heart finally broke. My daughter insulted me again, and this time I knew I could no longer try to please her. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when the sky feels heavy and everything inside the house echoes a little louder than usual. I was in the kitchen carefully folding laundry on the table because my hands needed something to do. My daughter Claire had come by unannounced. Her visits were rare these days, and when she did appear, they carried the sharpness of a blade hidden in silk. She stood in the doorway, one hand on her hip, her phone still glowing in the other. She didn't look at me as she spoke. Honestly, Mom, no wonder Dad left you. You're pathetic. Always trying to make everyone happy, and look where that got you, alone, miserable, and clinging to me like I owe you something. The words fell like shards of glass, cutting deeper than she could ever see. I froze, a half-folded towel in my hands. For a long time I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't even move. I had been insulted by her before. God knows her tongue had grown sharper over the years, but something in the way she said it this time was different. It wasn't just cruel, it was final. I looked at her. This grown woman I had raised, carried, sacrificed for, and loved beyond measure. I wanted to shout, to scream, to remind her of the nights I stayed up when she was sick, of the years I worked extra hours, just so she could have ballet lessons, of the clothes I went without, so she could look beautiful in hers. But instead I stayed silent. Silence had always been my answer, because silence felt safer than confrontation. Silence felt like patience, like motherhood, like love. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Claire rolled her eyes when I didn't respond. She muttered something under her breath, probably another insult, then swept out of the room with her perfume trailing behind her. The front door slammed, rattling the windows, and I remained at the table, the folded towel still in my hands, trembling. That was the moment. The moment I realized I would not keep bending, keep trying to please a daughter who only saw me as weak. I must confess something, this wasn't the first insult. Far from it. For years, Claire had wielded her words like weapons. At first, it was subtle, a sigh when I offered advice, a sarcastic comment about my clothes, an impatient laugh when I asked about her work. But over time, the cuts grew deeper. She told me I was outdated, that I didn't understand her world, that I had nothing to offer but complaints. She even once compared me to a charity case, someone she tolerated out of obligation. And I, foolish, patient Margaret, I swallowed every word. Because I loved her. Because I thought love meant never answering back. Because I thought if I just tried harder, she would see me, appreciate me, love me the way I loved her. But that day in the kitchen, when she compared me to the failure of my marriage, when she twisted the knife of abandonment into my chest, I knew. I knew there was no kindness left in her words, no misunderstanding, no moment of stress I could excuse. It was pure disdain, and something inside me broke, or perhaps something finally awoke. I sat at that table for hours after she left, staring at nothing, hearing her words replay in my mind. My husband had left years ago, true. He had found someone younger, someone who made him feel alive, he once told me. But never, not even in his cruelty, had he used that wound to crush me the way my own daughter just had. It struck me that the people we love most are the ones who know exactly where to strike. Claire knew my deepest shame, my deepest hurt, and she used it to demean me. And suddenly I realized I had raised her to believe she could. Every time I smiled through an insult, every time I excused her sharp tongue as just stress, every time I sacrificed myself for her comfort, I had built the very stage she stood on to humiliate me. When the sun began to sink that evening, casting golden light across the table where the towels still sat unfolded, I whispered aloud to myself, "No more." The sound of my own voice startled me. It was shaky but certain. And in that whisper, I felt the first tremor of strength I hadn't known was still inside me. I would no longer try to please Claire. I would no longer chase her approval. I would no longer trade my dignity for scraps of her attention. If she wanted to see me as pathetic, then let her. But I would not live as a woman who believed it. That was the breaking point. The day the mother she mocked finally stopped bending. And though it may sound small to anyone listening to me, it was everything. Because once a heart decides it has endured enough, no insult can chain it again. Little did Claire know that her words, those cruel, careless words, had just lit the fire of my quiet rebellion. And this time I would not put it out. When I finally whispered those words, "No more," the memories came flooding back, like a river breaking its dam. It was as though my heart, tired of being silent, demanded to show me every sacrifice I had made for Claire. Each memory sharp, each sacrifice vivid, each one carrying the question I had avoided for so long. Was it all for nothing? I was only 24 when I had her, a young wife still clinging to naive dreams about marriage and happiness. Her father and I weren't well off. We had more bills than savings, and our little house always needed repairs. But when Claire came into the world crying and perfect, I swore to myself I would give her everything, even if it meant giving up myself. And I did. I remember the long nights rocking her in my arms while her father slept soundly in the next room, claiming he had work in the morning. I remember those moments when my back ached, when exhaustion blurred my vision, but I kept going because her tiny fists were clinging to me. I gave up sleep. I gave up time. I gave up pieces of my health. Then came school. Claire wanted ballet lessons. They were expensive, more than we could afford, but she looked at me with those wide eyes and I couldn't say no. I took on extra tutoring jobs after teaching all day, sometimes coming home so late that my own dinner was cold. But when I watched her twirl in that pink tutu, smiling with pride, I told myself it was worth it. Everything was always worth it. The braces for her teeth, the summer camps, the clothes she wanted so she wouldn't feel different from her classmates, the endless stream of books, makeup, music lessons, college funds. Each time I reached deeper into myself, pulling out energy, money, and patience I didn't even have. And every time I told myself, she will see this someday. She will know how much I love her. But the truth she never saw. Instead, she began to expect it. As though sacrifice was not love, but duty. As though I owed her every comfort, every convenience, every little thing she desired. I remember one night vividly. Claire was about 15. She wanted a new phone because all her friends had one. I couldn't afford it at the time. I tried to explain gently that maybe she could wait a few months, that her old phone still worked. Do you know what she said? She spat back. "You're pathetic, Mom. Everyone else's parents do better. Why can't you?" That was the first time she insulted me outright. I remember feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. But instead of standing firm, I worked overtime for weeks, skipped meals, and finally bought her the phone. And do you know what she said when she got it? Not thank you. Not even a smile. Just, finally. I think that was the day a dangerous seed was planted in her and in me. In her, it grew into entitlement. In me, it grew into silence. The years rolled on. Claire grew into a beautiful young woman, admired, ambitious, with sharp wit and sharper words. She wanted the world, and I kept handing it to her in pieces. She wanted a prestigious college, so I drained every last drop of my retirement savings. She wanted an apartment in the city, so I co-signed the lease. She wanted freedom, so I swallowed my worries and stayed quiet, always telling myself, this is what good mothers do. But as she rose, I shrank, and she began to notice, not with gratitude, but with disdain. I think back to the moments I hid my own needs. How many times did I wear the same winter coat until the seams frayed, just so she could buy new boots? How many birthdays of mine went unnoticed because we were busy celebrating hers? How many tears did I swallow in the dark, telling myself I was fine because I couldn't bear for her to think her mother was weak. Even when my marriage collapsed, when her father left abandoning me after decades of half-love and excuses, I kept smiling for Claire. I didn't want her to think her life was falling apart too. But what did that teach her? That my pain was invisible. That my needs didn't matter. That she could take and take, and I would never stop giving. Sitting at that table, remembering it all, I felt a wave of grief so heavy I thought it might drown me. Had I created this monster? Had my love, my twisted, self-erasing version of love, taught her to see me as nothing more than a servant? I remembered the look on her face each time she got what she wanted. Not gratitude, not joy shared with me, just expectation fulfilled. And I thought about how many years I had wasted waiting for appreciation that would never come. But here's the thing about sacrifice: it's only beautiful when it is chosen freely, not demanded. And I realized I had crossed that line years ago without noticing. I had mistaken endurance for love. I had mistaken silence for strength. And I had mistaken my daughter's entitlement for youth, telling myself she'd grow out of it. But she hadn't. She had grown sharper, crueler, bolder in her disrespect. And I had grown smaller. The worst memory returned, then one that still stings. Claire was in her 20s, already living in the city. She had brought me to a dinner with some of her friends. I had dressed carefully, even bought a new blouse I couldn't afford, hoping to look like I belonged. When I reached for the menu, she leaned over and whispered loud enough for her friends to hear, "Don't embarrass me, Mom. Just order something cheap. You wouldn't understand this place anyway." Her friends laughed politely, but I saw the pity in their eyes. That night, I ate quietly, every bite tasting like shame. And Claire never once noticed. And now, sitting in my kitchen years later, replaying all of it, I asked myself the question I had always been too afraid to face. What if love wasn't enough? What if all my sacrifices had only built a wall between us instead of a bridge? What if she would never ever see me as more than the woman who gave, until she had nothing left? That day, after she left with her cruel words, I promised myself I will not sacrifice anymore. Not my pride, not my dignity, not the last fragments of myself. Because love that demands destruction is not love at all. And if my daughter cannot respect me, then I will stop teaching her that I do not deserve respect. The sacrifices are over. Distance doesn't happen overnight. It creeps in like fog rolling across a familiar street, until one morning you wake up and realize you can't see the road anymore. That's what happened between Claire and me. In the beginning, we were inseparable. She was my only child, the center of my life, my reason to keep going when everything else felt fragile. But slowly, almost invisibly, a wall began to rise between us. And the most painful part, I helped build it brick by brick, with every silence, every sacrifice, every time I put her comfort above my dignity. I first noticed it when Claire started high school. She had always been sharp, but adolescence sharpened her tongue into something cutting. She'd come home from school, toss her bag onto the floor, and complain about everything. If dinner wasn't what she wanted, she rolled her eyes. If I asked about her day, she sighed dramatically, muttering, "You wouldn't get it, Mom." I told myself it was normal. Teenagers are moody, I thought. She would outgrow it. I made excuses the way only a mother can. She's tired, she's stressed, she just wants independence. But deep down, I felt it. The warmth between us fading, replaced by something brittle. Then came college. She wanted to go far away, and though my heart clenched at the thought, I supported her. I drained my savings, took loans, did everything possible to give her the chance I never had. On the day I dropped her off, I hugged her tightly, whispering how proud I was. She pulled away too quickly, embarrassed, already glancing at her new friends. "Okay, Mom, you can go now," she said, her voice edged with irritation, as if I were an inconvenience. I remember driving home alone, tears blurring the road. That was the first time I felt like I had lost her. At first, she called. Brief conversations, updates about her classes, her new life, but over time the calls dwindled. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. When I tried to reach out, she often ignored my calls or replied with a curt text, "Busy. Talk later." I told myself not to cling. I didn't want to be that kind of mother. So I waited silently for her to remember me. But the distance only grew. I began to notice something darker too. When she did call, it wasn't to ask about me. It was to ask for something. Money for textbooks, help with rent, support when she fought with a boyfriend. Each conversation left me drained, but I kept giving. And each time her gratitude thinned until it disappeared altogether. I became a utility in her life, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. The insults started small, woven into her casual speech, like thorns hidden in roses. "God, Mom, you're so old-fashioned. You wouldn't understand. You've never done anything big with your life. You're so dramatic, it's embarrassing." The first time she mocked me in front of her friends, I laughed along nervously as though agreeing would soften the blow. I convinced myself she didn't mean it. But deep down, I knew. A daughter who once clung to my hand now rolled her eyes at my very existence, and every insult created another brick in that invisible wall. When she moved permanently to the city after college, the distance became more than emotional, it was physical. She visited rarely, and when she did, it was with the air of someone doing me a favor. She would sit on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely engaging, as though the home she grew up in was a waiting room she wanted to escape. Sometimes I tried to start conversations. I'd ask about her work, her friends, her dreams. She would shrug, distracted, offering half answers until finally she'd snap. "Why do you always interrogate me? Can't you just relax?" That word, interrogate, stung. I wasn't interrogating. I was trying to hold on to the daughter who seemed to be slipping away. I also noticed the comparisons. Claire admired other women friends' mothers who were wealthier, more glamorous, more successful. Once she even told me, "I wish you were more like Jenna's mom. She's cool. She gets it." She said it offhandedly, scrolling her phone as if the words meant nothing, but they meant everything to me. I stayed awake that night replaying them, wondering what I lacked, why my daughter couldn't see the value in the mother who had given her everything. There were still moments of closeness, brief flickers that gave me hope. Once, when she was sick, she called me in tears and I rushed to her apartment with soup medicine and warm blankets. For a few days, I cared for her like when she was little. She was softer then, leaning into my presence, letting me hold her hand as she drifted to sleep. But as soon as she recovered, the warmth evaporated. She returned to her sharpness, her dismissive tone, her distance. It was as if tenderness embarrassed her, as if needing me made her resent me more. Over the years, I noticed how she curated her life without me. On social media, she posted photos of dinners with friends, vacations with boyfriends, glamorous work events. I scrolled through them alone, my heart aching. Rarely was I included. Rarely did she acknowledge me publicly. I became a shadow in her life, someone she tolerated in private but erased in public. And that distance, that erasure, cut deeper than any insult. Looking back, I see how the pattern formed. Every time she pushed me away, I pulled her closer. Every time she mocked me, I tried harder to please. Every time she created distance, I built a bridge. But those bridges were one-sided. She never crossed them. She just watched as I exhausted myself building roads to nowhere. And with each failure, I grew smaller. That's the cruel irony of motherhood. You pour everything into your child, believing it will bind you together forever. But sometimes the more you give, the more they take, and the less they value you. I thought love would be enough, but Claire mistook my love for weakness, and so the distance became not just physical, not just emotional, but spiritual. She stopped seeing me as a mother, as a woman, as a person. I was just there, always there, too there. But I was beginning to awaken. That last insult in the kitchen had shown me the truth. This distance wasn't accidental. It was chosen. She had chosen to see me as less. And now, for the first time, I was choosing too. I was choosing not to chase, not to please, not to let the fog consume me anymore. The distance would remain, but this time I would not try to bridge it. This time she would have to decide whether I was worth crossing the distance for. Words. They can heal, they can comfort, they can carry love across distances, but they can also destroy. With Claire, I learned that words could be weapons. What began as impatience in her tone gradually sharpened into cruelty, disguised as honesty. I remember one evening when she came to visit. I had cooked her favorite meal, roast chicken with garlic potatoes and green beans sautéed in butter. I had spent hours preparing it, setting the table, even lighting a candle, to make the house feel warm and inviting. When she arrived, she barely looked up from her phone. She sat down, poked at the food with her fork, and muttered, "You still cook like it's the 80s, Mom? Don't you know people eat healthy now?" I forced a smile, saying nothing, even though my chest tightened. She pushed the plate away and ordered takeout on her phone while sitting at the same table where my efforts lay untouched. That was the first time I realized my love expressed through food care tradition had become a target for ridicule. Then came the day she criticized my appearance. I had put on a new blouse one I'd been saving for a special occasion. It was pale blue, soft cotton, modest but elegant. I wore it when meeting her for lunch. She looked at me once, then said, "You know, Mom, you really don't dress your age. That top makes you look desperate, like you're trying too hard." Her words stung deeper than she knew. I had been nervous about that blouse, wondering if it was too youthful. I wore it because I wanted to feel alive, not invisible, but she saw through none of that. She only saw an opportunity to belittle me. I laughed it off, changing the subject, but inside I was crumbling. There were countless conversations like that, moments when I tried to connect, and instead walked away with invisible wounds. When I asked her about her job, she scoffed. "Mom, you wouldn't understand. You've never worked in the real world. Teaching kids in a small town doesn't count." When I asked if she was seeing anyone, she said, "Stop prying. It's embarrassing how nosy you are." When I tried to share something about my own life, a book I was reading, a memory, even a story about the neighbors, she rolled her eyes. "God, you're boring." Each remark chipped away at me, and each time I told myself to endure, to stay calm, to not escalate. I thought silence meant maturity. I thought swallowing pain meant love. But the truth. Silence only gave her permission. It wasn't only me she disrespected. I noticed how she spoke about others too. Her friends, her coworkers, even strangers. She dissected their flaws with sharp precision, as though cutting people down made her taller. But when she turned that blade on me, it cut differently, because I wasn't just people. I was her mother, the woman who had raised her, who had given her everything. And hearing cruelty from her felt like betrayal, layered on betrayal. One night during a phone call, I tried to express how much I missed her. I told her gently that the house felt too quiet without her laughter, that I sometimes wished she'd visit more often. She sighed loudly. "You're so clingy, Mom. No wonder Dad couldn't stand living with you. You guilt trip everyone around you." The words burned. She had weaponized my greatest wound again, my failed marriage, and twisted it into an explanation for why I was unlovable. I wanted to scream, to tell her how cruel that was, to remind her that she wouldn't even exist if I hadn't fought for her when her father wanted to leave years earlier. But instead, I swallowed it, my throat tight, my voice trembling as I whispered, "I'm sorry." Why did I apologize? Why did I let her convince me that my longing for connection was weakness? Another memory stands out like a scar. It was Christmas Eve. She had promised to come home but arrived late carrying expensive shopping bags for herself. I had decorated the tree-baked cookies wrapped thoughtful little gifts I could afford. She tore through the wrapping paper with a bored expression, opening the sweater I had knitted for her. She glanced at it once and said, "Wow, another homemade thing I'll never wear. You really don't get what people want, do you?" Then she laughed, laughed, and in that laughter I felt something inside me collapse. I began to dread conversations with her. I never knew when the cruelty would come, when her words would pierce the thin armor I had left. It was like walking barefoot on glass, always bracing for the next cut. But what haunted me most wasn't just her cruelty, it was how natural it felt to her. As if respecting me wasn't even an option in her vocabulary. As if I didn't deserve the dignity of kindness. I started questioning myself constantly. Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining the venom in her voice? Was I overreacting? But then I remembered how my heart sank every time. Real pain doesn't come from imagination, it comes from truth. And the truth was clear. My daughter didn't see me as a mother to be cherished. She saw me as a punching bag, a mirror for her contempt. Still I endured. I told myself it was just her way, that she didn't mean it, that deep down she loved me. But every cruel conversation left scars I could no longer ignore. And the more I remembered, the more I realized something terrifying. I had taught her this. By never pushing back. By never demanding respect. By pretending her cruelty didn't hurt me, I had shown her it was acceptable. I had been complicit in my own humiliation, and now it was too late to erase the damage. Or was it? That thought lingered in my mind. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I couldn't change the past, but I could change the future. I couldn't make her love me, but I could stop letting her treat me as less. The cruelty had gone on long enough. And with each memory, each conversation, I felt my resolve hardening. It's strange how cruelty can sharpen your own clarity, how the very words meant to break you can sometimes awaken you. Claire's cruelty had carved me hollow, yes, but in the emptiness, I finally saw the truth. I had nothing left to lose. There is a kind of pain that comes not only from the cruelty of words, but from the silence that surrounds them. I could have endured Claire's sharp tongue more easily, perhaps, if someone, anyone, had stood beside me, had spoken up, had said, "That's enough." But no one ever did. It was at family gatherings where the silence became unbearable. Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, birthdays, the moments meant for warmth became battlefields. I fought alone. I remember one Thanksgiving especially well. The house was full. My sister, her husband, their children, even Claire's father stopped by out of courtesy. I had cooked all day, pouring my heart into a table that smelled of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. Claire arrived late wearing an expensive coat, her hair perfectly styled, her voice carrying that familiar edge. She sat down, glanced at the food, and said with a smirk, "Oh, Mom still makes everything with butter. No wonder she looks the way she does." Laughter rippled around the table. Not cruel laughter, but awkward, nervous, the kind that fills silence when no one knows how to respond. My sister quickly changed the subject, and my ex-husband kept carving the turkey as if he hadn't heard. And I forced a smile, cheeks burning, pretending it didn't matter. But inside I was screaming. Why is no one defending me? It wasn't the first time. At Christmas the year before, Claire had unwrapped a gift I'd chosen carefully, a locket with a tiny picture of us inside. She looked at it once, shrugged, and said, "I guess I'll put it in a drawer somewhere. It's not really my style." The room fell silent for a moment. I glanced around, waiting for someone to scold her, to tell her she was being cruel. But then, my brother-in-law cleared his throat and asked about the football game. And just like that, my humiliation was swallowed by silence. That silence hurt almost more than Claire's insults, because cruelty from one person is survivable. But when everyone else looks away, it confirms the cruelty as truth. It says, "You deserve this. You are not worth defending." I began to feel invisible in my own family, A woman stripped of her dignity standing in plain sight yet unseen. Why did they stay silent? I've asked myself this question over and over. Maybe they thought it wasn't their place. Maybe they didn't want to stir conflict. Maybe they thought I was strong enough to handle it. Or maybe, and this is the thought that cut deepest, they agreed with her. That possibility haunted me. That maybe I really was the woman Claire described, pathetic, outdated, clingy, weak. Maybe I had become a burden everyone simply tolerated. Even my sister, the one I thought would understand, often brushed it off when I confided in her later. She's just young, she'd say. You know how kids are. She'll grow out of it. But Claire wasn't a child anymore. She was a grown woman. And every cruel word she spoke wasn't immaturity, it was choice. The silence didn't only belong to family. Friends too saw it and looked away. Once Claire insulted me at a dinner with some of her friends. She made a joke about me being so clueless I probably still used paper checks. Her friends laughed politely, glancing at me with pity. But no one said, "That's not funny." And I laughed along weakly, pretending it didn't wound me, pretending to be in on the joke. How many times did I laugh at my own humiliation just to keep the peace? It became a pattern I couldn't break. Claire would insult me. The room would grow tense. Someone would change the subject. And I would shrink into myself, smiling to hide the sting. Every silence added another layer to my loneliness. But here's the truth I didn't see. Then silence is not neutral. Silence sides with the abuser. By saying nothing, my family told Claire that her cruelty was acceptable. By looking away, they gave her permission. By staying quiet, they made me feel small. And so the silence became another betrayal. I remember one night in particular. It was Claire's birthday, and I had gone to her apartment with a cake I baked myself. She was surrounded by friends, laughter, music, champagne. I walked in holding the cake proudly, only to hear her say, "Oh, my mom's here," with one of her homemade cakes. You know how she is always trying too hard. Everyone laughed. My face burned. I set the cake down on the counter, stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to say something. No one did. Claire's friends carried on as though her words were harmless, as though humiliating your mother was normal. I excused myself early that night, leaving the cake behind. I cried the whole drive home. Over time, I learned to expect the silence. I learned not to hope for rescue. I told myself, "You are alone in this. Don't count on anyone else." And maybe that was the moment I began to change. Because when you realize no one is coming to save you, you finally understand that saving yourself is the only option. Still, the pain lingered. Even now, I can close my eyes and see the faces of my family, hear the awkward laughter, feel the weight of their silence pressing down on me. I wonder if they knew how deeply it cut, how it confirmed the belief that I was invisible, unworthy, disposable. But maybe their silence was the gift I didn't recognize at the time. Because if they had defended me, perhaps I would have kept waiting for others to shield me. Perhaps I would never have found the strength to stand alone. Perhaps I would never have whispered those words in my kitchen that day. No more. The silence of others taught me the loudest lesson. No one will defend me if I don't defend myself. And that realization, bitter, painful, sharp as glass, began to harden inside me. I was done being invisible. I was done being the woman everyone overlooked while she was torn apart by words. I was done mistaking silence for patience. The next time, I promised myself I would not stay quiet. The next time, I would be my own voice. Humiliation has a way of searing itself into memory. You can forget the details of 1,000 ordinary days, but one night of shame will replay in your mind forever, as vivid as if it happened yesterday. For me, that night was a family gathering, one where my daughter's cruelty broke through any last illusion I had of being respected. It was a summer evening, warm and golden. My sister had invited everyone over for a backyard barbecue. There were string lights hung between the trees, music playing softly, and the smell of grilled food drifting through the air. It should have been a joyful night. I told myself it would be. I dressed carefully, bringing along my best potato salad, a recipe everyone always asked for. Claire arrived late as usual, but when she walked in, she drew all the attention. She wore a sleek dress, her hair perfect, her voice loud and commanding. People flocked to her. She had that ability to fill a room, to make others orbit around her like she was the sun itself. I sat back watching her laugh and gesture, pride and ache battling in my chest. She was dazzling, yes, but she was also mine, and no one else in that yard knew the price I had paid for her brilliance. Dinner began. Plates passed, glasses filled. I sat across from Claire at the long wooden table, the string lights glowing above us. For a while, things felt almost normal. She chatted about her job, her apartment in the city, her friends. Everyone listened with admiration. Then my sister, smiling kindly, turned to me and said, "Margaret, how's retirement treating you? Do you miss teaching?" It was a harmless question, gentle one I could have answered with warmth. But before I could open my mouth, Claire leaned forward, smirking. "Miss teaching, please. Mom barely kept up with those kids. Half the time she came home complaining she was exhausted. Honestly, it's better she's out. She was never cut out for anything bigger than a small-town classroom." The table went quiet. Her words landed like a slap. My hands trembled as I held my fork, my chest tightening. She didn't stop there. She kept going, her voice light, joking to the others. "She still acts like her little lessons were life-changing. No offense, Mom, but you were just a glorified babysitter. You should have aimed higher instead of settling." I looked around the table. Eyes darted away. Some people cleared their throats. Others forced nervous smiles. No one spoke. Not a single person defended me. And Claire. She laughed, sipping her wine as though she hadn't just gutted me in front of everyone I loved. I tried to swallow the hurt, to gather myself, but the damage was done. Every eye that avoided mine felt like another blade. My sister quickly changed the subject. My brother-in-law told a joke, and the conversation moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was burning. I had spent decades teaching. I had poured my soul into those students staying after class to help the ones who struggled, buying supplies out of my own pocket, writing letters of recommendation late into the night. I had been a good teacher. I knew I had. But in that moment, with Claire's laughter hanging in the air, all of it felt erased. As if my life's work amounted to nothing more than a punchline in my daughter's story. After dinner, people began drifting into smaller conversations, laughter rising again as if the insult had never been spoken. But I couldn't shake it. I excused myself quietly, slipping into the bathroom. I locked the door, leaned against the sink, and finally let the tears fall. I looked at myself in the mirror, a woman in her mid-50s, tired eyes, lines etched deep from years of endurance. I whispered aloud, "Why does she hate me?" But there was no answer. Just the muffled sound of laughter from the yard echoing through the walls. I returned eventually, face washed, smile forced. I pretended nothing had happened because that's what I always did. Claire never once looked at me with remorse. She carried on, dazzling, magnetic, the center of attention. But I sat there in silence, my humiliation pressing on me like a weight I could no longer bear. When the night ended, I lingered behind, helping my sister clean up. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her quietly how much Claire's words had hurt me. My sister sighed, her voice low. "She didn't mean it, Margaret. You know how she is. She's just showing off. Don't take it to heart. Don't take it to heart." As if my daughter mocking my entire life's work was nothing more than harmless play. As if the ache in my chest could be dismissed with a shrug. That was the moment I realized my humiliation didn't matter to anyone else. Not enough for them to speak. Not enough for them to stand up. Not enough for them to see me. I drove home alone that night. The road was dark, the headlights stretching into emptiness. Claire's words replayed in my head over and over. Glorified babysitter. You should have aimed higher. Each repetition dug deeper, convincing me that maybe she was right. Maybe I had wasted my life. Maybe my sacrifices were small, my choices unremarkable, my existence forgettable. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, whispering through tears, "I gave you everything. How can you see me as nothing?" But humiliation has two faces, one that breaks you and one that ignites you. That night, sitting in the darkness of my car, I felt both. The breaking came first, shattering the last pieces of illusion, but underneath it, buried deep, was a spark that whispered, "You don't have to take this anymore." I didn't act on it yet. I wasn't ready. But something had shifted. That night of humiliation was not the end of me. It was the beginning. Looking back, I see it clearly. That barbecue wasn't just another family gathering. It was the night I finally understood that Claire would not stop until I stopped her, that the silence of others would continue until I found my own voice. Humiliation became my turning point, because once you've been stripped of all dignity in front of everyone you love, there's nothing left to lose. And in that nothingness, I found the first fragile thread of strength: patience. That was the mask I wore for decades. It was my shield, my disguise, my way of surviving in a house where words could wound as deeply as knives. I convinced myself that patience was love, that silence was strength, that swallowing pain meant I was being a good mother. But now when I look back, I see it clearly. Patience was the rope with which I tied myself down. After that night of humiliation at my sister's barbecue, I tried to act as though nothing had changed. I smiled at Claire when she called. I asked about her work. I listened to her complaints. I told myself, "You're her mother. You must stay patient. She'll grow out of this cruelty someday." But inside, I was unraveling. Each insult left cracks in the mask, though I patched them quickly with excuses. "She's tired. She's stressed. She doesn't mean it." How many times did I say those words? How many times did I bend reality just to avoid admitting the truth, that my daughter was cruel and that I was letting her be? I remember once when she came home for a weekend. I made pancakes the way she used to love as a child, fluffy golden with strawberries and whipped cream. She sat down, glanced at the plate, and said, "God, Mom, you still make food like a grandma. Haven't you ever heard of health trends? No wonder you look like you do." I smiled weakly, my hands trembling as I poured her coffee. I laughed softly as though she had told a harmless joke. I told myself, "Be patient. Don't ruin the morning." But inside, the humiliation burned. Another time I offered to help her fold laundry while visiting her apartment. She rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, please don't touch my clothes. You'll probably fold them wrong like everything else." Her friends were there and they laughed. I laughed too, though my heart ached. Patience. Always patience. I became a master of hiding pain. I perfected the art of the polite smile, the gentle nod, the quiet retreat to another room when tears threatened to fall. I didn't want her to see me cry. I didn't want her to think she had broken me, but she had. Over and over again. The truth is, my patience was not strength. It was fear. Fear of losing her completely. Fear that if I pushed back, she would cut me out of her life. Fear that if I demanded respect, she would leave and never come back. So I swallowed everything. I wore the mask of patience like armor, convincing myself it was noble. But in reality, it was cowardice disguised as love. There were moments when I almost slipped, when the mask cracked, and I nearly told her how much she was hurting me. Once, after a particularly cruel remark about how no one could stand being around me for long, I opened my mouth to reply. But then she rolled her eyes, grabbed her purse, and walked out the door before I could speak. I sat in silence for hours afterward, the unsaid words suffocating me. The mask also fooled others. Family members thought I was fine because I never fought back. Friends assumed Claire must be respectful because I never complained. Even Claire herself believed her behavior was acceptable because I never challenged it. My patience became the perfect stage for her cruelty, and I hated myself for it. But here's the strange thing: the more I wore that mask, the heavier it became. Every time I smiled through an insult, I felt the weight pressing harder on my chest. Every time I stayed quiet, I felt my own voice dying inside me. Until finally I realized I wasn't being patient anymore. I was disappearing. The mask of patience turned me into a ghost in my own life. I was there physically cooking, cleaning, calling, caring, but emotionally I was gone. I wasn't living, I was enduring. And enduring is not the same as living. I remember lying in bed one night after Claire had left, staring at the ceiling in the dark. My chest felt hollow, my throat tight. I whispered to myself, "Who am I now? Am I only a mother? Do I even exist without her approval?" The silence of the room was my answer. I had given her everything: my body, my time, my love, my sacrifices. And in return, I had erased myself. The mask of patience had cost me my identity. But cracks, once they appear, cannot be hidden forever. And mine were beginning to show. When Claire insulted me, I still smiled, but my eyes no longer matched the smile. When she mocked me, I still laughed, but my voice shook. When she dismissed me, I still stayed quiet, but my heart whispered louder than ever, "No more." The mask was slipping, and once it slipped, it would shatter. Looking back now, I see that patience was not entirely wasted. It taught me something. It taught me the limits of endurance. It showed me how far love could stretch before it broke. And most importantly, it gave me the contrast I needed, because once the mask fell, I would finally know what real strength looked like. Not silence, not endurance, not disappearing, but voice, boundaries, dignity. I think of all the times I chose patience instead of honesty, silence instead of truth. If I had spoken, then maybe things would have been different. Maybe Claire would have learned to respect me earlier. Maybe I wouldn't have lost so many years to invisibility. But regret is a useless weight, and I am tired of carrying it. The mask of patience served its purpose, but now it was suffocating me. And soon I would tear it off. For decades, I believed patience would save my relationship with my daughter, but in reality, patience destroyed it. Because what she needed was not a mother who swallowed every insult, but a mother who stood tall enough to demand respect. And though it took me years to see it, I finally understood love without respect is not love at all. Every rebellion begins quietly, not with fireworks or shouts, but with a whisper in the dark. This is not right. This is not who I am anymore. After years of patience, after swallowing insult after insult, something inside me began to stir. I wouldn't call it anger, not yet. It was smaller, more fragile. A seed. But seeds once planted grow in silence until one day they break through the ground unstoppable. The first seed was planted the day Claire left my house after calling me pathetic. I sat at that kitchen table for hours, the folded towel still in my hands, the words echoing like a curse. But instead of collapsing entirely, I whispered, "No more." That whisper became the soil where rebellion would take root. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice things differently. Situations I once endured without thought now felt unbearable. When Claire called me out of the blue and immediately launched into a rant about her coworkers using me as a venting machine without once asking how I was, I caught myself thinking, why am I listening to this? When she criticized the way I decorated my living room, "It looks like a grandma's house. No wonder you don't have friends over." I didn't laugh it off this time. I just stared at her silent, and I could tell my silence unsettled her. When she asked me for money casually, as though I were an endless fountain, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the checkbook, but something inside me resisted. For the first time, I wanted to say no. I started reading again. That may sound small, but it was enormous for me. I had always loved books, once devouring novels late into the night, but somewhere along the years I had stopped. My evenings had been filled with exhaustion, with worrying about Claire, with trying to prepare for her visits. One afternoon, I pulled a dusty old book from my shelf and began reading. The words transported me, reminded me of who I used to be. Margaret, the young woman who dreamed of writing her own stories, who loved poetry, who found beauty in language. I realized I had buried that woman beneath layers of sacrifice, and as I turned the pages, I felt her stirring again. Another seed of rebellion came from my own reflection. For years, I had avoided mirrors, glancing only briefly to fix my hair or check my clothes. But one night after Claire had left, I forced myself to look. I saw the lines on my face, the sag in my shoulders, the weariness in my eyes. But beneath it, I saw something else, something she had not destroyed. Strength. It was faint, yes, hidden under years of silence, but it was there. And I whispered to myself, "You are not done yet. You are not just someone's mother. You are still Margaret." I began to practice small acts of defiance, though no one else noticed them. I bought myself a new dress, not for a family gathering, not for Claire's approval, but because I liked it. When she later rolled her eyes and said it was too bright for my age, I smiled, but this time, the smile wasn't fake. It was daring. I stopped answering her calls immediately. When she texted, I sometimes waited hours, even a day, before replying. I told myself I do not exist at her convenience anymore. And when she came to visit one weekend and criticized the way I cooked, I calmly said, "Then you can cook next time." Her mouth fell open. Shock flickered across her face. She laughed it off quickly, but I saw the ripple of unease. For the first time, my daughter realized I might not always bend. The rebellion also grew inside my thoughts. I started questioning things I once accepted blindly. Why did I always assume I had to host every holiday? Why did I let her dictate the tone of our conversations? Why did I shrink every time she raised her voice? The answers were painful. Because I was afraid. Because I wanted love. Because I confused servitude with motherhood. But as painful as those answers were, they were also freeing. Because once you recognize a chain, you can begin to break it. One night, while journaling something I hadn't done since my 20s, I wrote down a single sentence that became my mantra: "I do not have to earn my daughter's love." The words stunned me. My whole life I had believed otherwise, that every sacrifice was an attempt to secure her love, that if I just tried harder, she would finally see me. But love that must be earned is not love, it is transaction. And I was done living like a beggar at my own child's table. My rebellion wasn't loud yet. I didn't scream, I didn't confront her outright. But rebellion doesn't always begin with fire. Sometimes it begins with stillness, with the quiet decision to no longer bow, and that decision was growing inside me. Claire began to notice, though she didn't fully understand. She commented once, "You've been different lately. Less clingy." I just smiled. Inside I was laughing. Not cruelly, but with a kind of giddy freedom. Yes, I was different. Yes, I was less clingy. Because finally I was beginning to reclaim myself. Still, rebellion is a dangerous thing. It doesn't stay hidden forever. Seeds grow into sprouts. Sprouts into vines, and eventually they crack through the walls built around them. I knew a confrontation was coming. I could feel it in the way Claire looked at me, suspicious, as though she sensed her grip slipping. And though part of me still feared her anger, another part welcomed it. Because I was no longer afraid of losing her. I was afraid of losing myself. That shift from fear of her to fear of my own erasure was the beginning of everything. The seeds of rebellion had been planted, and soon they would bloom. Silence. It had been my shield for years. But one evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I realized silence wasn't just something I endured, it was something I had created. And in creating it, I had given Claire permission to hurt me again and again. I thought about all the times I had swallowed her words, the night she mocked my teaching career, and I stayed quiet while everyone else looked away. The Christmas she laughed at the locket I gave her, and I forced a smile as though my heart hadn't just shattered. The dozens of conversations where I said nothing while she chipped away at my dignity. My silence was not strength, it was complicity. I had let her believe there were no consequences. I had let her think I was unbreakable, or worse, that I didn't matter enough to be broken. And because of that, she grew bolder. Every insult sharper, every dismissal colder. I remember one night in particular. Claire had come over clearly in a bad mood. She vented about her coworkers, complained about her boyfriend, then turned on me. "You're so lucky you had me, young mom. If you'd waited, no man would have wanted you. Honestly, it's pathetic how little you've done with your life. You're a warning, not an example." The words stung, but what haunted me more was what I did nothing. I sat there silent. I nodded weakly. And eventually, I even murmured, "You're probably right." Can you imagine a mother agreeing with her own child's cruelty just to keep the peace? That night after she left, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered aloud, "I did this to myself." It was the hardest truth I had ever admitted. By silencing myself, I had trained her to treat me this way. If I had spoken up the first time she mocked me, maybe she would have thought twice. If I had drawn boundaries, maybe she would have learned respect. If I had demanded dignity, maybe she would have given it. But I hadn't. I had built my own cage. For days after that realization, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every memory replayed with new clarity. I saw myself smiling through insults, laughing through humiliation, pretending to be fine, while my heart bled. And the more I replayed, the more furious I became, not just with Claire, but with myself. How had I allowed this? Why had I taught her that love meant silence? Why had I sacrificed my own dignity for scraps of her approval? The answers hurt, but they were necessary. I had been afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of being alone. Afraid that if I demanded respect, she would walk away forever. But now I saw the irony. I had lost her anyway. She was already distant, already cold, already cruel. My silence hadn't saved her. It had only destroyed me. One evening, I pulled out an old box of letters. Years ago, when Claire was small, I used to write to her birthday cards, notes slipped into her lunchbox, little reminders that she was loved. I kept copies of some of them. I opened one and read my own words. "No matter what, I will always be here for you. Always." I cried when I read that, because I realized I had lived those words to the letter. I had always been there, always available, always quiet, always enduring. But what had it taught her that she didn't need to be there for me, that I would tolerate anything, that my love was unconditional to the point of self-destruction? I began journaling about it, forcing myself to confront my silence. I wrote, "My silence is not patience, it is permission. Every time I swallow pain, I teach her she can cause it again. Love without boundaries is not love, it is surrender." Seeing the words on paper shook me, because they were true. The next time Claire visited, I tried something new. She made a snide remark about my house. "God, this place is stuck in the past. It's like a museum for failures." Normally, I would have laughed or changed the subject. But this time I didn't. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just looked at her. My silence was different this time. Not weak. Not submissive. But steady. She noticed. Her eyes flickered unsettled. She shifted in her seat as though she wasn't sure why the game felt different. She eventually changed the subject herself. And in that moment I realized silence can wound, but silence can also resist. Still, I knew silence alone wasn't enough anymore. I couldn't just stop responding, I had to start speaking. For decades, I had let her voice drown mine out. Now I needed to reclaim my own. That night after she left, I stood in front of the mirror again. I looked at my reflection, at the woman who had endured too much, and I whispered, "You don't have to be silent anymore. You have the right to speak. You have the right to exist." It felt strange, foreign, almost rebellious to say those words, but they were true. The confrontation hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. I could feel it in my bones. Claire would insult me again, of that I had no doubt. But next time I wouldn't meet her with silence. Next time I would speak. And when I did, the world we had built, the world where she held all the power, would begin to crumble. Life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect them. Sometimes they arrive like whispers, other times like lightning strikes that split the sky open. For me, the shocking discovery came not from what Claire said, but from what she tried to hide. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened. Claire had asked me to stop by her apartment, something rare, as she usually preferred to meet me on her terms in public places, where she could control the narrative. I thought foolishly that maybe she wanted to spend time with me. When I arrived, her apartment looked pristine, too pristine. Claire had always been meticulous, but this was different. Every surface gleamed, every cushion perfectly placed. I knew immediately she was hiding something. She was nervous too. Her smile was tight, her movements sharp. She kept glancing at her phone, fidgeting as though she were waiting for something or someone. I tried to ignore it. I sat down, asked about her work, her friends. She answered in clipped tones, eyes darting toward the door. Then her phone buzzed and she excused herself to the kitchen to answer it. That's when I saw it. On the coffee table beneath a pile of glossy magazines was an envelope. It was addressed to her, bold letters stamped with urgency. Something about it tugged at me, an instinct I couldn't ignore. I shouldn't have looked, but after years of being humiliated, of being made small, my curiosity carried the weight of rebellion. I slid the envelope out just far enough to read the words, "Final notice." My heart stopped. Claire returned a moment later, snatching the envelope before I could say a word. Her face flushed with anger. "Were you snooping? God, Mom. Do you have to ruin everything? You can't even sit still without meddling." Her voice was sharp, but beneath it I heard something new. Fear. "What is it, Claire?" I asked quietly. "What's going on?" "Nothing you'd understand," she snapped, shoving the envelope into a drawer. "It's not your business." But it was my business, not because I wanted it to be, but because that envelope was a mirror. For years she had painted herself as above me, smarter, stronger, more successful. Yet here she was, hiding failures she couldn't face, and suddenly I saw her cruelty for what it truly was: projection. Her insults, her belittling, her contempt, they weren't just about me, they were about her. In the weeks that followed, the pieces began to fall into place. I noticed the expensive clothes she wore but never repeated, the lavish dinners she posted online, the trips she bragged about. All while her job, though respectable, couldn't possibly fund such a lifestyle. And now, with that envelope, I knew the truth: she was drowning in debt. Credit cards, loans, unpaid bills, she was balancing it all on a house of cards. I had sacrificed my entire life for her, given her everything, and still she wanted more. So much more that she had driven herself into ruin. At first I felt pity. My heart, foolish as always, wanted to rescue her, to step in, to save her, to fix what she had broken. But then another feeling rose up, sharper, heavier, undeniable: anger. Because how many times had she called me pathetic? How many times had she mocked me for settling in my small-town life, for living within my means, for not chasing glamour? And yet, here she was, reckless and irresponsible, hiding behind insults to mask her own failures. She had mocked my sacrifices while she squandered hers, and I had let her. The discovery changed something fundamental in me. It shattered the illusion of her superiority. For years, I had looked at Claire through the eyes of a mother who believed her child was brighter, bolder, destined for more. I let her words cut me because I believed she stood taller than me. But now I saw the truth: she was fragile, terrified, and flawed, just like me, perhaps worse. One evening, I decided to test her. I asked casually, "Claire, how's your credit card? You always seem to be buying new things." She froze. For just a moment, fear flickered in her eyes. Then she recovered, smirking. "Don't worry about me, Mom. I know how to handle my life. Unlike you. Unlike me." Those words would have broken me once, but now they only revealed her desperation to keep the mask intact. The shocking discovery wasn't just about her debt. It was about her mask, the one she wore as tightly as I had worn mine. I had hidden behind patience. She was hiding behind arrogance. And just as my mask was beginning to crack, so was hers. I went home that night and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the quiet space around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small, because I finally understood my silence had allowed her to feel powerful, but her cruelty was never real strength. It was a smokescreen for her own fear. And now that I knew the truth, I held the power. Still, I didn't confront her immediately. I waited. I wanted the right moment. A moment when my words would pierce the way hers had pierced me. The discovery gave me patience of a new kind, not the silence of fear, but the silence of strategy. For years she had spoken while I stayed quiet. Now I would stay quiet until I chose to speak. And when I did, she would finally hear me. That envelope, that single word, "final notice," became my weapon. Not to humiliate her, but to remind her that dignity cannot be stolen with insults, that a life built on cruelty and lies will always collapse. And for the first time, I was ready. Ready not just to endure, ready not just to whisper no more, but ready to look my daughter in the eye and speak the truth she had always denied me. The confrontation was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And when it arrived, it would no longer be a mother begging for love. It would be a woman demanding respect. Confrontation doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one delivered calmly, without shouting, without rage, just truth spoken with a steady voice. After decades of silence, I finally reached that moment with Claire. It happened on an ordinary evening, or at least it started that way. Claire had come over for dinner. I had cooked again, not out of desperate habit, but because I genuinely enjoyed cooking for myself now. The food wasn't prepared for her approval. It was made because I wanted to eat well. That in itself was a quiet rebellion. She arrived late, sweeping in with the same careless energy, her phone glued to her hand. She barely looked at me before commenting, "You still live like this? Mom, you really need to update your house. It's depressing." Normally, that would have been the moment where I forced a laugh, where I said nothing, where I wore the mask of patience. But not this time. This time, I simply placed her plate on the table, sat down across from her, and let the silence stretch. She noticed. Her eyes narrowed. "What? Don't start sulking. You know I'm right." I met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "No, Claire. You're not right. You're cruel." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling outward. She blinked as though she hadn't heard me correctly. "Excuse me," I repeated, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You're cruel. And I've allowed you to be cruel to me for years. But I won't anymore." Her mouth opened, then closed. She was searching for the sharp reply that usually came so easily, but I had taken the script from her hands. I continued, my voice unwavering. "I stayed silent all this time because I thought it was love. I thought swallowing your insults made me a good mother. But all it did was teach you that I didn't deserve respect. And that was my mistake." Her face flushed. "Oh my God, Mom, you're being dramatic again. You always twist things to make yourself the victim." I shook my head. "No, Claire. This isn't drama. This is truth. You've mocked me, humiliated me in front of family, made me feel small in my own home. And I stayed quiet. But not anymore. For the first time in years, the power shifted. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't trying to make her see my worth. I was simply stating it. Her voice rose defensive. Why are you doing this now? What do you want an apology? Do you want me to say, you were the perfect mother because you weren't? I let her words hang in the air, then said softly, no one is perfect. But I gave you everything I had. And it's time you realized that giving everything doesn't mean being treated like nothing. She went silent. The quiet between us was different this time. Not the silence of endurance, but the silence of confrontation. She couldn't joke it away. She couldn't roll her eyes and escape. I was holding her gaze and she couldn't look away. Then calmly, I added the truth I had discovered. I know about the debt, Claire. Her face drained of color. What are you talking about? The envelope on your table. The final notice. You don't have to lie, I saw it. And I know now why you've been so cruel to me. It was never really about me, was it? It was about you. About your own failures, your own fear. Her hand tightened around her fork, her knuckles white. You had no right to, I interrupted softly. You're right. I had no right to read it. But I had every right to finally understand that your insults were not truth. They were projection. You've been tearing me down to avoid looking at yourself. The words hit her harder than I expected. Her eyes filled with something I had rarely seen in her vulnerability. She looked away, staring at the wall as though it might rescue her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint clink of cutlery against plates. Finally, she whispered almost too quietly to hear, "You don't understand." I leaned forward. Then help me understand. Tell me why you thought it was easier to destroy me than to admit you're struggling. Her defenses rose again, though weaker this time. You wouldn't get it. You've never had ambition. You settled for less your whole life. I can't be like that. I let her words wash over me. They no longer pierced like they once did. Because now I saw the truth beneath them, fear. Claire, I said gently, there's nothing wrong with wanting more. But there is something wrong with stepping on the people who love you to get there. And there is something wrong with confusing arrogance with strength. The confrontation wasn't explosive. There were no shouts, no slammed doors. But it was powerful because it was quiet, because it was steady, because it came from a place of clarity. For years I had begged for her love in silence. Now I was demanding respect with words. And though she didn't apologize that night, though she didn't suddenly soften, I saw something shift in her eyes. Doubt. Doubt that her cruelty was justified. Doubt that she could keep treating me the same way. Doubt that the balance of power was still in her favor. After dinner, she left quickly, her steps sharp, her voice clipped. She didn't hug me goodbye. But as the door closed behind her, I felt no despair. Instead, I felt lighter. Because I had finally spoken. Because the mask of patience had been shattered. Because my silence was over. That night, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the plates still on the table, and whispered to myself, "You did it." For the first time in decades, I had stood up to her. Not with anger, not with venom, but with truth. And though the road ahead would not be easy, I knew one thing with certainty: the spell had been broken. I would never be silent again. Confrontation is never the end of a story. It is the spark that sets everything else ablaze. After that evening at my kitchen table, when I finally told Claire the truth, the air between us changed. The silence I had lived with for decades was broken, and in its place came something new: fallout. The next few days were eerily quiet. Normally, Claire would text me short, clipped updates, demands, or even criticisms disguised as casual remarks. But this time, there was nothing. No messages, no calls. At first, I worried. Old habits are hard to kill, and part of me feared I had pushed her too far, that she would cut me out of her life completely. The thought of losing her made my chest ache. But then I remembered what I had told myself: better to lose her than to lose myself. And for the first time, the thought brought me peace instead of panic. When she did call, her voice was different. Not soft, not apologetic. No, that would have been too much to hope for. Her voice was sharp, brittle, dripping with anger. "How dare you, Mom?" she spat. "How dare you go through my things? You think you know me now. You think one little discovery gives you the right to lecture me. You don't understand anything about my life." Her fury echoed through the phone, but I didn't flinch. "I don't need to understand everything," I replied calmly. "I only need to understand that you've been using me as your target, and I won't let you anymore." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "Wow, so now you think you're the victim? Unbelievable." But beneath her anger, I heard it again: fear. The fallout spread quickly through the family. Claire called my sister, twisting the story, painting me as overbearing and cruel. She snooped through my private mail, Claire told her. She accused me of being a failure. She made me feel attacked in my own mother's house. My sister called me later, her voice uneasy. "Margaret, maybe you were too harsh. You know how sensitive she can be." I almost laughed. Sensitive. The daughter who had humiliated me publicly, mocked me for decades, was suddenly the one being protected. But instead of defending myself, I simply said, "Maybe. But I'm done being silent." My sister didn't know what to say. The silence between us was heavy, but I didn't fill it this time. I had filled enough silences in my life. Claire's anger only grew. She stopped visiting altogether. When she did call, her words were sharper than ever. "You've ruined everything," she said once. "You've ruined our relationship. All because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." I almost cried then, but not for the reasons she thought. I cried because I realized she still believed our relationship had been real, as if humiliation and cruelty were love, but I didn't let my tears show. I steadied my voice and said, "If our relationship depended on my silence, then it wasn't real to begin with." She hung up on me. The fallout reached its peak at another family gathering. It was Claire's birthday this time, hosted by my sister at her house. Against my better judgment, I went. Part of me still clung to hope that maybe, just maybe, Claire would see me differently now, but hope is a dangerous thing. When I walked in, I felt the tension immediately. Claire was surrounded by friends, gifts, laughter. When she saw me, her smile faltered, then twisted into something sharp. "Oh," she said loudly. "My mom's here. Everyone be careful, she's probably going to snoop through your things and lecture you about your life choices." Laughter rippled through the room. My face burned. It was the same old pattern, except this time I wasn't the same woman. I stood tall, looked her straight in the eye, and said clearly, "Claire, enough." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward us. "You've humiliated me in front of this family for years." I continued, my voice steady. "I let it happen because I thought my silence was love. But love isn't cruelty, and I won't let you use me as your joke anymore." The room stayed still, stunned. Claire's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. For once, the silence belonged to her. The fallout was immediate. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door. The party continued awkwardly, conversations hushed, eyes avoiding mine. My sister approached me later, whispering, "Maybe you shouldn't have done that here." But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. Because for the first time in my life, I had defended myself, not in private, not in whispers, but out loud where everyone could hear. In the weeks that followed, Claire kept her distance. Our conversations, when they happened, were cold. She was furious, I could tell. But underneath her anger, I sensed something else: hesitation. Because now she knew I wouldn't stay quiet. Now she knew I wouldn't bend. Now she knew the old rules were broken. And though she hated it, she couldn't ignore it. The fallout wasn't just about her, though. It was about me. I felt freer, lighter. Yes, the conflict was painful. Yes, her anger stung. Yes, the family's judgment hurt. But underneath it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: dignity. I could look in the mirror without shame. I could hear my own voice and believe in it. I could exist without begging for scraps of love, and that more than anything was worth the fallout. Looking back, I see now that the fallout was necessary, because sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt. Sometimes relationships have to collapse under the weight of truth before anything new can grow. And though I didn't know what would happen next with Claire, I knew this: I had survived the fallout. And I was stronger for it. Fallout is chaos, but chaos clears space for change. After Claire's fury, after the whispers from family, after the awkward silences that followed, I realized something had shifted. Not just in her, but in me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The tide was turning, and I was ready to let it carry me. In the past, whenever Claire pulled away, I chased her. If she ignored my calls, I left messages. If she avoided me, I found excuses to see her. If she insulted me, I smiled and tried harder to win her back. But not this time. When days turned into weeks without hearing from her, I didn't pick up the phone. When she finally texted me a cold, clipped message that said, "So I guess you're done playing mom now," I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I let the message sit there for a full day before answering with 3 simple words: "I deserve respect." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no desperate attempt to soften the truth. And the silence that followed was louder than any insult she had ever thrown at me. Something inside me was changing. I started doing things for myself again, little acts of reclamation that felt enormous after years of neglect. I joined a book club at the local library. I baked pies not because Claire liked them, but because I did. I started walking every morning, breathing in the crisp air, letting the rhythm of my steps remind me that I was still alive, still capable, still worthy. Neighbors began to notice. "You seem different, Margaret," one of them said. "Lighter." And they were right. The weight of silence, humiliation, and fear was lifting from my shoulders. But change rarely goes unchallenged. Claire wasn't used to this new version of me, and she didn't like it. One evening she called unexpectedly. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "So this is it. You've decided you're some kind of saint. Now, you think you're better than me." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No, Claire. I don't think I'm better than you. I just finally realized I'm not less." The line went quiet. Then she scoffed. "You've lost it. Completely." But the tremor in her voice told me she knew the tide was turning. The real test came 2 weeks later. She came to visit unannounced, as always, storming into my kitchen with that old, familiar energy. But this time I didn't flinch. She dropped her bag on the chair, glaring at me. "You've been ignoring me. I've been respecting myself," I replied calmly, continuing to chop vegetables for my dinner. Her eyes narrowed. "You're being ridiculous. Families don't work like this. Mothers are supposed to." I set the knife down and turned to face her. Mothers are supposed to love, not surrender. Her mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't used to me interrupting her. "You always made me feel like," she began, her voice rising. "No," I cut in firm. "I didn't make you feel anything. You chose to insult me, you chose to humiliate me, and I chose to stay silent." But that silence is gone now. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her jaw tight. The silence stretched between us, heavy, electric. I felt my heart pounding, but I didn't back down. Finally, she muttered, "You've changed." "Yes," I said simply. "And you'll have to decide if you can live with that." That night, after she left, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the quiet street. The tide had turned. For years, she had dictated the rhythm of our relationship, her insults, her coldness, her control. But now, I was no longer dancing to her tune. And whether she admitted it or not, she felt it. The turning tide wasn't just about Claire. It was about me reclaiming the parts of myself I had abandoned. I began writing again little journal entries that grew into short stories. I planted flowers in the garden, bright bursts of color that reminded me life could still bloom after winters of neglect. I even bought myself a new piece of furniture, a sturdy oak table for the kitchen. It wasn't for family dinners, not for anyone else, just for me. When I set it up polished and gleaming, I thought, this is mine, mine alone. And in that moment, I felt free. Claire noticed the change in other ways, too. She began to test me, throwing out little barbed comments to see if I would bend. Still living in this little house, huh? You'll die alone if you keep acting like this. You've become selfish, Mom. But each time I met her words with calm strength. Yes, this house is mine, and I'm proud of it. If I die alone, I'll die with dignity. Selfish, no. I'm finally self-respecting. And every reply unsettled her. She would roll her eyes, mutter something under her breath, and leave. But I saw it, the cracks forming in her arrogance, the doubt flickering in her eyes. The tide was turning, and she could feel herself losing her grip. One night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I had come. From the woman who laughed off insults to the woman who now spoke her truth. From the mother who begged for scraps of love to the woman who demanded respect. The tide had turned, and I was no longer drowning. I was learning to swim. Every action has a consequence, and every tide that turns eventually crashes against the shore. Claire's reckoning didn't come all at once, but in waves, small at first, then larger, until she could no longer deny that her power over me was slipping away. It began with the silence. Not mine, hers. For years she had filled our conversations with barbed comments, with insults disguised as jokes, with cruel comparisons. But when her words no longer broke me, when my calm responses unsettled her, she started to retreat. Calls grew shorter. Texts came less often. Visits were rare. Part of me wondered if she thought she was punishing me, depriving me of her presence. But the truth, each absence felt like a gift. My house was quieter, my days lighter, my heart freer. Her silence for once brought me peace. Then came the cracks in her own life. Cracks she could no longer hide. One afternoon, my sister called, her voice full of worry. "Margaret, have you heard Claire's been struggling at work? There are rumors she might lose her job." I hadn't heard. Claire hadn't told me. Of course she hadn't. Vulnerability was something she had always avoided in front of me. But now those cracks were showing. And I realized something important. The image of strength she had built was never real. It was a mask, just like mine had been. But where my mask was patience, hers was arrogance. And both were crumbling. When she finally came to see me again, her energy was different. She was thinner. Her eyes shadowed her movements, restless. She sat at my kitchen table, picking at the edge of a napkin, her usual confidence gone. For a moment, I saw not the cruel daughter who mocked me, but the frightened child she used to be, the little girl who clung to me during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let go, Mom." But then her pride returned sharp as ever. "Don't start lecturing me," she snapped. "I don't need your pity." I stayed calm. "I'm not offering pity, Claire. I'm offering truth. You can't keep living like this. You can't keep tearing people down to hide from yourself." Her eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. "You don't know anything about me." But I did. More than she realized. The reckoning deepened when the family began to notice the shift between us. At another gathering, she tried once again to use me as her punchline. "Careful," she said loudly. "My mom might write all of this in her sad little diary." Normally, laughter would have followed. But this time, there was none. My sister frowned. My nephew looked uncomfortable. Even her friends glanced at her awkwardly. Because now the air around me was different. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I wasn't laughing along. I was sitting tall, calm, unflinching. The joke fell flat, and for the first time she looked small. That was her reckoning, realizing that the world no longer conspired with her silence to humiliate me. The biggest reckoning, however, came with her debt. Eventually, the notices caught up to her. She couldn't hide them anymore. Creditors' called letters piled up, and her carefully curated image began to unravel. She came to me one night, desperate tears streaking her face. "Mom, I need help." It was the moment I had always imagined, the moment where I could step and rescue her, sacrifice myself again. But I didn't. I placed my hand gently over hers and said, "I will not save you from the consequences of your choices. I love you, but I will not destroy myself to cover what you've broken." Her eyes widened, shock flooding her face. She pulled her hand back as though burned. "You've changed. You don't even care about me anymore." I shook my head. "No, Claire. I finally care about myself." That was her reckoning, the realization that the mother she had mocked, belittled, and used could no longer be bent. She shouted, she cried, she accused me of abandoning her. But none of it swayed me. I stood firm, calm, steady as stone. And for the first time, she saw it, that the power she once held over me was gone. In the weeks that followed, she began to soften, though she fought it every step of the way. Small gestures slipped through her armor. A hesitant thank you when I made tea. A rare question about my day. A text that simply said, "Are you okay?" They were small, imperfect, fleeting, but they were real. Because her reckoning wasn't just about losing her grip on me. It was about facing herself, the cracks, the failures, the truth she had tried so hard to bury. And though I couldn't fix her, I could finally stand tall enough to let her see me clearly. Looking back, I realized that the reckoning wasn't only hers. It was mine too. For years, I thought being a mother meant giving until I had nothing left. I thought silence was love, patience was strength, self-erasure was duty. But now I knew the truth. Real love demands boundaries. Real strength demands voice. Real motherhood is not about pleasing, but about teaching, even if the lesson comes late. And perhaps in the end, that was the only gift I could give her. Not money, not endless sacrifices, not a mother who bent until she broke, but a mother who finally stood tall. The reckoning had come. And though it was painful, though it was messy, it was necessary, because only when everything else fell apart could something new begin. Peace is not given, it is chosen. And after all the years of insults, humiliation, and silence, I finally chose mine. The days after Claire's reckoning felt different, quieter, steadier, almost unfamiliar in their calm. For so long my life had revolved around her moods, her demands, her approval. Now there was space. Space I hadn't felt in decades. At first it was strange. I found myself reaching for the phone to call her out of habit. But then I stopped, realizing I no longer needed to chase her. My life was not meant to orbit around a daughter who had forgotten the meaning of respect. Instead, I began to fill my days with things that brought me joy. I spent mornings in the garden, dirt under my nails, sun on my face, planting flowers that would bloom in colors brighter than any insult. I read books until late at night, letting words remind me of the beauty I had once abandoned. I reconnected with old friends, people I had pushed away because I had been too busy trying to please someone who never wanted to be pleased. And slowly, I remembered who I was. Claire noticed the change, even if she wouldn't admit it. When she came by less often now, but still, she looked around my home with different eyes. She saw the new table, the fresh flowers, the books stacked neatly on the side table. "You've been busy," she remarked once, her voice tinged with something unfamiliar. Not disdain, not arrogance. Something closer to respect. "Yes," I said simply. "I've been living." She didn't reply, but she didn't insult me either. And in her silence, I heard something shifting. The relationship between us didn't transform overnight. There were still sharp words, still moments when her pride flared, still times when she tried to pull me back into the old rhythm, but I no longer danced to it. Each time I stood firm. Each time I reminded myself I deserve respect. I deserve peace. and each time the grip she had over me loosened further. One evening she asked me quietly, "Do you even love me anymore?" The question cut deeper than all her insults combined, because beneath it I heard the child she used to be, the little girl who once crawled into my lap, who once clung to me in thunderstorms. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Claire," I said softly, "I never stopped loving you, but I've stopped letting love destroy me. That's the difference." She looked down, silent, her eyes glistening. For once she had no sharp reply. And that was enough for me. Because love, I finally understood, does not mean erasure. Love is not silence. Love is not bending until you break. Love is voice, boundaries, truth. If she learned that lesson from me now, even this late in life, then maybe, just maybe, I had done my job as her mother after all. When I think about my journey now, it is not with bitterness, but with clarity. Yes, my daughter insulted me. Yes, I endured too much. Yes, I wore the mask of patience until it suffocated me. But I also found my voice. I found my strength. I found the courage to stop chasing love and start choosing dignity. And in that choice, I found peace. If you are listening to this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, let me tell you this: you are not alone. You are not weak. And you do not have to live in silence. Respect is not given freely. It is demanded not with anger, but with steady truth. I chose peace the day I whispered no more in my kitchen. And every day since then, I have chosen it again and again. Because peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of self-respect. And after a lifetime of bending, I have finally learned how to stand tall. So tell me, have you ever been pushed to your breaking point by the ones you love most? Have you ever had to choose between their approval and your dignity? If so, I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Grace's Truth, where stories like mine remind us that even in betrayal, even in pain, we can always choose truth, dignity, and peace.